Rights. It is the only center in the United States that focuses on the civil rights of Muslims, Arabs, and South Asians that is housed in a U.S. law school. We have three goals, or three themes, I should say, to address the intersection of race and religion in the United States, to look at the ways in which national security law and policy criminalizes Muslim identity, and third, to focus on transnational security and transnational rights and how they connect back to these domestic themes. So today's speaker and our lecture, Sikh Americans' Quest for Religious Freedom and Racial Justice, and our speaker, Kiran Gill, is part of our Color of Religion lecture series. This is our third of four, and we're very fortunate to have Kiran here. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to personalize this a bit. But she's one of New Jersey's star leaders. She's started a business very successfully. She's an attorney. She now is the executive director of the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund. And we're also very fortunate to have her on our board of advisors for the Center for Security, Race, and Rights. And as somebody who's focused on these civil rights issues for nearly 19 years now, something that we learned very quickly was that, well, we confirmed, I should say, is the way in which the social construction of race encompasses a broad range of people, right? It homogenizes, in other words, very, very diverse group of people, one group of whom are Sikh Americans, who many of you may know have very frequently been mistaken for Muslim as the basis for the violence against them. And I'll say one thing that I really respect about many of the Sikh American organizations and civil rights groups is that they did not respond by saying, no, 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 we're not Muslims, they are, go after them. What they responded is, anti-Muslim bias and racism is wrong, Islamophobia is wrong, you cannot engage in hate crimes against us or any other community. And so I feel indebted to the Sikh American community, who's been very effective, I should say, because I've worked with many of their leaders in civil rights advocacy of post 9/11. So we're very, very fortunate to have Ms. Gill here today, and I will now give the floor to our fellow who will introduce Ms. Gill. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Mbalo Sanogo, and I'll be introducing our speaker for the day. Ms. Karen K. Gill holds an undergraduate degree from New York University and a Master of Business Administration in Business and Technology from New Jersey Institute for Technology. And she is also a graduate from Stanford University Executive Program in Social Entrepreneurship. Prior to having her own firm and practice, Ms. Gill was the former president and CEO of PARS Environmental Inc., a full-service environmental consulting firm based in Rubensville in New Jersey. In 2014, Ms. Gill was selected as Small Business Person of the Year by the United States Small Business Administration, and she represented the state of New Jersey at National SBA Conference in Washington, D.C. Ms. Gill was also elected among the best 50 women in business by New Jersey Biz and listed among the top 40 entrepreneurs under 40 by New Jersey Biz the same year. In 2018, Ms. Gill was named among the top 50 most influential people of color in New Jersey by ROI New Jersey. In addition to her professional accomplishment, Ms. Gill is involved in a variety of community and civic organizations, including, as Professor Aziz already mentioned, being the executive director of SALDEF, which is the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund. She's also president and the founding member of Inspiring South Asian American Women. It is an organization dedicated to promoting civic and community engagement among South Asian American women in New Jersey. She served as a board member of the One Project, an interfaith and community coalition organized to address social needs through education and volunteership. She served as the community service chair of the NJIT AMBA alumni community. And in addition, she has volunteered for the Habitat for Humanity International, Habitat for Humanity, and Global Village program in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where she worked alongside a team of international volunteers and members of the local community to build quality, affordable shelter for families. So I would like you to please welcome our speaker for the day. Thank you.
Wow, that was quite an introduction, so thank you, thank you so much. As been mentioned a couple times, I'm Kiran Gill, and I'm the Executive Director of SALDEF, the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund. We are a Sikh American advocacy organization based out of Washington, D.C., and we focused on civil rights and religious freedom, so very apropos for this presentation. Today I'm going to be talking about, again, the quest for religious freedom and racial justice for Sikh Americans. I'm going to take you way back to the start all the way to the present, so we have a lot of information to go through in what I understand to be a short amount of time. Really, it's a story of struggle for acceptance of Sikh Americans due to their appearance and their religious articles of faith, but it's also a story of perseverance and triumph, and I hope to show you both sides of that equation. Very quickly, I'm going to, again, run through things with some speed because of timing. But I'd like to just start off with a little bit of background about Sikhism for those who don't know. So the word Sikh literally means student, to learn. Sikhism is one of the major religions, but it's one of the newer religions. It's a little over 500 years old. In fact, we're coming up to the anniversary of its founding 550 years ago. You may be surprised to know that it's actually the world's fifth largest religion in terms of number of adherents. There's 27 million Sikhs worldwide. The majority are in India, however. And the reason for this may be surprising is because you often don't hear about it in the US. We don't have such a large population here in the US compared to others. There's between 500,000 and 700,000 Sikhs here. And also, again, it's a newer major world religion, so that's another reason that it may be surprising. So again, a little bit of background. The majority of Sikhs, 23 million, are still in India, but we do have between 500 and 700,000 Sikhs here in the US. And I'd like to say there's a large concentration here in New Jersey, so. Sikhism was founded in the 15th century by a man named Guru Nanak, who spoke out about injustices of the day, and in particular the caste system. The caste system was very prevalent when Sikhism emerged in 1469, and the caste system promotes the idea that people are broken into different classes or castes in society based on the family that they were born into. And this determined what you could achieve in society and the level of respect that you were afforded. You could only interact, work, or marry with people within your caste, and Guru Nanak rejected this idea. Sikhs believe in the idea of the concept of one God, a creator who loves and sustains the whole of humanity. Because we believe there's one God for everyone, we believe that everyone is equal in the eyes of God. This goes across gender, ethnicity, race, and language. So Sikhs believe, again, in this idea of equality. And everyone should be loved and treated with respect. One of the traditions that highlights this is langar. And langar is a free meal prepared all by volunteers, and it's served to anyone at any time who enters a religious house of worship called a gurdwara. And it's served after every service. The meal is open to everyone, again, regardless of your religious or ethnic background. And everyone sits together on the floor, and this symbolizes equality. Everyone's at the same level. You know, in the sort of ancient days, a king and a pauper. Probably in this modern time, you could have a president and, you know, somebody that's homeless. So everybody is at the same level regardless. And so that's a core tenet of Sikhism. Guru Nanak also spoke out about gender inequality, which was something very revolutionary at the time. But I also want to point out to one of these points, I guess, here on this slide, social justice and religious pluralism, which is interesting because when you think of social justice and particularly religious pluralism, these are often thought about as American ideals. And this is something that Guru Nanak spoke about during his day. All people and faiths come from one God, so it's our duty to protect and advocate for others. And as I talk about the journey of Sikh Americans here in the US, that's one idea and concept that I believe really carried them through. Again, I'm going to run through this quickly, but one of the most distinguishable concepts in Sikhism is the Articles of Faith. There are five Ks. The first is Ks, which is uncut hair, and it's a symbol of spirituality and strength. In the time of the Gurus, spiritual people often kept long uncut hair. Kashera, which is cotton short, symbolizing chastity. Gara, which is a steel bracelet worn on the dominant hand, and it's a reminder to do what is right and act in the best interest of humanity. Ganga, which is a comb symbolizing cleanliness and discipline, and Kirpan is a religious sword symbolizing standing up against injustice and defending the defenseless. And over the uncut hair, Sikhs are known and can be seen wearing a turban. It's a fundamental part of a Sikh's religious identity, and it's required to cover the uncut hair. Typically, they're about 18 to 27 feet long of cotton fabric, and it's wrapped every day. An interesting fact, 99% of people wearing a turban in the United States are Sikh. So typically, if you go and you see somebody wearing a turban, it's most likely to be a Sikh here in the United States. I'd now like to turn it over to Sikh's journey in America. And it can really be divided into 6 different periods. The first period, 1898 to 1907, was a period of open migration. Sikhs arrived in America before the turn of the last century due to the demand for laborers to build railroads and to work on the lumber yards. The next period, 1908 to 1924, saw legal barriers put in place to prevent the migration of Asians and other non-whites. The Immigration Act of 1917 created an Asiatic barred zone which banned all Asians from immigrating to the US, including Indians. During the third period, the exclusion era of 1924 to 1945, migration was illegal due to race and national origin. Interestingly enough, 3,006 migrated during this time, so go figure. The fourth period, 1946 to 1964, was marked by the removal of racial barriers to naturalization for South Asian Americans. The Luce-Seller Act of 1946 allowed a maximum of 100 Indians and 100 Filipinos to immigrate to the US. In the fifth period, 1965 to 1980, which many of you may be familiar with, racial restrictions were removed from US immigration policy. What was going on during that time, in the 1960s, 1970s? You had the space race, you had programs, Medicare and Medicaid. So a lot of, and you also had the Cold War. So a lot of the immigrants had backgrounds in engineers and the sciences, and they were highly educated. And this led to a large influx of Sikh professionals. The final period, beginning in 1980, saw a diversification of class and educational constituency of Sikh migrants. Can everyone read this and see this? I'll read it for those that can't. The title of this article, which is from 1899, Sikhs allowed to land. The 4 Sikhs who arrived on the Nippon Maru the other day were permitted yesterday to land by the immigration officials. The quartet formed the most picturesque group that has been seen on the Pacific Mall dock for many a day. One of them, Bakshil Singh, speaks English with fluency, the others just a little. They are all fine-looking men, Bakshil Singh in particular being a marvel of physical beauty. He stands 6 feet 2 inches and is built in proportion. His companions, Bodh Singh and Varam Singh, and Sachava Singh, are not quite so big. All of them have been soldiers and policemen in China. They were in the Royal Artillery, and the tall one with his unpronounceable name was a police sergeant in Hong Kong prior to coming to this country. They hoped to make their fortunes here and return to their home in Lahore, the Lahore district, which they left some 21 years ago, or 20 years ago, rather. So what can you see from this? Well, first of all, you see that Sikhs were here at the turn of the century. So Sikh Americans have been in this country for a long time, not in an extremely large population at that time. But the other thing interesting in this description is they're seen as exotic. They're non-threatening, they're exotic, they're sort of a marvel. And that's what you see initially when the first migrants came over. It was a difficult journey. It took over a month to travel from India by boat. And Sikhs typically, the first Sikhs actually came from the Doaba region of Punjab. They came to seek opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, on the railroads and in the lumber yards. And like many immigrants, they came together. So you see these men traveling together. And that's provided a support system. So in Sikhi, we have a concept called Sangat, and it's community. And early on, these men stuck together and formed a community. And I'll be talking about how that community evolved as I go through my presentation. Just to give you some idea, prior to 1900, 85% of the pioneer Punjabi migrants were Sikh, or identified as Sikh, 13% as Muslim, and the rest Hindu. As immigration restrictions tightened in Canada in the early 1900s, more immigrants came directly to California. They arrived through Angel Island, the immigration station in San Francisco Bay. And this experience was markedly different than the experience in Ellis Island. They were not always welcome. Sikhs and other South Asians who sought entry into the United States were subjected to close examinations at the immigration station, and they were often held for weeks or months. And they were carefully screened, and this was to deter a large population from coming in. In addition, the conditions at these centers were unsanitary. The Public Health Service notes that the water supply was contaminated, the kitchen infested with flies and cockroaches. Massive overcrowding was even worse for migrants. One dormitory room with air space for 10 men was crammed with 54 bunk beds. So what does this kind of sound like? As I was reading it, I just thought, what does this sort of sound like? Anyone? Camp? Oh, I'm not sure what camp you're going to, but maybe. Anyone else? Yeah. Prison, yeah. You know, a lot of the stories we're hearing now out of the detention centers, it's interesting. You see this sort of, it resonates, and you see this type of behavior by authorities going on for quite a while. So just something that resonated with me that I wanted to share. Unfortunately, thousands of potential migrants were denied entry during this time. Many South Asians chose to return to their homes voluntarily, including 3,000 between 1920 and 1940. So many of these people had spent their fortunes and their time in trying to get here to the US to pursue the American dream, only to go back. Nearly 35,000 South Asians were denied entry into the US between 1908 and 1920. The most common pretext for denial by immigration officials in the hearing with predetermined outcomes was the likelihood of becoming, anyone want to fill in the blank? Yes, good. I don't know who said that in the back, but in the front, just kidding. But good, yes. And again, where is this sort of something we're hearing in modern day discourse? Yeah. So one example I want to share is the example of Bishan Singh. Bishan Singh, an Indian Sikh, was deported from Angel Island in the summer of 1916. And the reason for his deportation was because he was likely to become public charge. But during his hearing, Bishan Singh testified that he originally had been admitted to the United States through Angel Island on June 18th, 1910. He remained in the United States until December 31st, 1913, when he returned to the homeland to get married. So then he came back. Bisham Singh explained that he'd worked throughout California, picking oranges and doing ranch work, and during that time he also learned to speak English. And in fact, they had 3 Californian ranchers that vouched for Bisham Singh. Not only did they attest to his ability to do hard work, to be industrious, but they also indicated that they could provide Bisham Singh with steady work. They could provide him with a job, which is basically opposite of what you would think of when you think of somebody on public charge, right? Somebody that has a full-time occupation. Regardless of this, the 3 voting commissioners at Angel Island denied Bisham Singh re-entry to the United States in 1916. Sorry, there's a lot of dates in this presentation, so just bear with me. Remarkably, typically it's a unanimous decision in a lot of these cases. In this particular case, one of the voting commissioners actually sided with Bisham Singh because of all this evidence that they had that he would not become public charge, but unfortunately that was not enough for him to be able to stay. So for Bisham Singh and other Sikh Americans who sought only to enter this nation to work hard and improve their lot in life, their encounter with the government made it clear that their appearance and their national origin were more important than the likelihood of them becoming public charge. So really this idea of public charge was something that was not true, something that was not borne out by evidence. So upon arrival in the US, Sikhs, along with other South Asians, were prevented from becoming citizens until 1943 due to discriminatory legislation. And that legislation only allowed limited naturalization rights and allowed naturalization of free white persons. Legislation was enacted to prevent the migration of Sikh women with the aim of preventing the formation of a second generation. Obviously difficult to have a second generation if you have no women. So there was laws in place that stipulated that wives, because they wouldn't have a vocation, and remember in that day women weren't working, so they didn't see the usefulness of them coming over. And also there was laws in place from these immigrants owning land. So due to this, the first Sikh American community was almost an entirely male community. And if you look at these pictures, I think that's rather obvious. You don't see any women in a lot of these pictures. In 1914, women comprised less than 1% of California's Sikh immigrant population. Some Sikh Americans were separated from their families for decades, while some stayed single their whole lives. You also had a group of Sikh Americans that married Mexican women in California because they were allowed to. Remember, they're not allowed to marry white women, but they were allowed to marry Mexican women. So you do have a community in California of Punjabi and Mexicans. Okay, I have 10 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna just speed this up really fast. Okay, some of the things the early Sikh migrants encountered, let's see here. Well, let me just first go through these pictures really quick. You can see the Sikh farm workers, and you also see this here, the railroad workers. So the 2 main industries, as I mentioned earlier, the railroads and the lumber yards, were the first 2 industries in California that Sikh Americans and South Asian Americans participated in. They were known for their hard work, for being industrious, and unfortunately, especially as their numbers got larger in California, this was an issue for the workers that were already there, because a common refrain, and we hear this today a lot of times during elections, immigrants are coming and taking our jobs. in the 1900s, that was no different. So unfortunately, the Sikh migrants had to deal with a lot of issues in terms of racialized violence during that time. And one particular incident I just want to share is the incident in Bellingham, Washington, which happened in 1907. A mob of 500 white men, predominantly members of the Asiatic Exclusion League, attacked the homes of South Asian Indians. The mob threw the East Indian workers into the streets, beat them, and pocketed their valuables. The authorities cooperated with the mob by corralling the beaten Indian immigrants into City Hall. By the next day, 125 South Asians had been driven out of town. About 400 were held in Bellingham jail, reportedly under protective custody. No participants in the mob were persecuted. Does this sound familiar? So there's a lot of common themes here with other incidents. If you think about the case of Emmett Till, again, nobody was prosecuted and everybody knew what was happening. In the aftermath of the expulsion, the Bellingham Herald carried an editorial that condemned the lawless nature of the riot, but championed both white supremacy and the expulsion of undesirables, like the Sikhs, in a dignified manner. So the issue that they had was the way it was done, not that it was done in and of itself. And I will, there's a lot of really cool pictures here, and I'll share this afterwards because I'm going to run through some of this quickly. I just want to share this. So obviously there was hardships when the Sikh American community first came over, but they found solace in the community. And that was most represented in the community center, the Gurdwara. So this top picture here is a picture of this Stockton Gurdwara, which was built in 1911. It was the first Gurdwara in the United States. As early immigrants, it became a true community center actually for all the immigrants, South Asian, so Hindu, Sikh, Muslim. It also became a center where they could talk about issues of the day, how they dealt with a lot of these discriminatory practices, and also a center for speaking about political issues back home. So one of those big political issues was the liberation of India. In the early 1900s, a small group of political refugees arrived from British India. They migrated to find a place where they could organize to liberate their homeland from British imperialism. And this group was called the Ghadar Party. The group not only was able to organize and address those issues, they were also able to provide a way to discuss the issues that Sikh Americans were facing here in the US, and they were able to tie those two together. Said if we're liberated, if we get liberation in India, if we are able to liberate ourselves from British colonialism, we will increase our standing here in the US. So it was significant. They ran a newspaper or a newsletter that reached almost every South Asian and every country where South Asians were. And that came out of, again, the Ghadar Party, which was based in San Francisco. And this is the newsletters were written in both Punjabi and Urdu. So despite the challenges that the early Sikh Americans faced, they still wanted to contribute to society and be part of the American experience. And one example is Bhagat Singh Thind. So he was the first Sikh to serve in the US Army in 1918. And when he returned home, he wanted to become a naturalized citizen. He said, I've fought for this country. I want the same rights as my fellow soldiers. In 1923, unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruled against him in the case United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind, which unfortunately, due to that ruling, also retroactively denied all Indian Americans born abroad citizenship for failing to meet the definition of a white person. So prior to that, there was a case of the Supreme Court against Takao Ozawa, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, a Japanese American, and they denied him citizenship because they said he wasn't Caucasian. Well, when Bhagat Singh Thind argued that Indian Americans were Caucasian, they went back and they said that Indian Americans don't meet the common man's definition of a white person. So again, they were using some convoluted logic to exclude Asian Americans from citizenship. And interestingly enough, Asian Americans remained unable to become United States citizens well into the 20th century. So despite setbacks in the Sikh American community, they tried to continue to push for change and inclusion in American society. And this is a picture of Dalip Singh Sondh, who was the first Asian American member of Congress elected in 1955. And he also has an interesting story. He's a PhD in mathematics. He studied at Berkeley. However, because of the policies of the time, he was not able to get a job in any of the professions that he was qualified for. So instead, he was forced to take a job as the foreman of a cotton-picking gang. In 1930, Sondh was commissioned by the Stockton Gurdwara to write a book called My Mother India. His book addressed India's caste system and advocated for the civil rights of the downtrodden in India as he compared the caste system in India to racism in America and elsewhere. Later, he campaigned to allow people of South Asian descent to become naturalized citizens. After the Luce-Celler Act of 1946, he applied for naturalization and became an American citizen in 1949. And in November 1955, he announced his campaign to run for House of Representatives as a Democrat, and he won the election for that open seat. So I mentioned this a couple times, but again, the influx of Sikh American migration happened due to the Hart-Celler Act of 1965. And it removed the nationality quotas that favored Europeans and minimized immigrants from Africa and Asia. And again, it looked at skill-based versus country-based. And this was motivated by a lot of things going on at the time, the space race, Medicare and Medicaid. They were really looking for professionals. So in many ways, those Sikh migrants that came through during the 1965 came through with at least the educational advantage. And I'm gonna, in the interest of time, not go through this slide in great detail, but so just share a very quick personal anecdote. So my family actually came over to the United States due to the Hart-Celler Act of 1965. My father was an engineer, my mother a doctor. And I remember being we were very involved in the Sikh community here in New Jersey and in DC when we lived there for a bit. But one of the things that I think we didn't do the best job of as a community was raise a level of awareness of who we are in this country. There was a strong emphasis on becoming professionals, becoming educated, and I think the community really started to understand that, unfortunately, as you saw the effects after 9/11. Because there was not a lot of media imagery for Sikhs prior to that, and unfortunately, what you saw after that, the image of someone with a turban and a beard, the predominant image was you saw pictures in the media of Osama bin Laden, and there was that unfortunate linkage, incorrect linkage. And due to that, after 9/11, the community received a lot of backlash, which was which was not warranted, because Sikhs obviously had nothing to do with 9/11. So some of the examples I just want to share. The first victim of a hate crime was Balbir Singh Sodhi. He was shot in Mesa, Arizona, a couple days after 9/11. And he was actually returning to his gas station. A lot of Sikhs during that time wanted to show their patriotism. He had bought American flags. He was trying to go and display them on his gas station, and he was shot because somebody thought he was a terrorist, so in sort of quote-unquote retaliation for what was done. Interestingly enough, we talk about, the sharing our story, and a lot of times the media and doesn't get that correct, and it's not necessarily, we don't necessarily get help from other sources. And Balbir Singh Sodhi actually had a memorial in Mesa, Arizona, and the governor of Arizona at a couple years back was trying to get Balbir Singh Sodhi's name removed from that memorial of victims of 9/11. And that's something that SALDF actually, we had a letter campaign and we tried to make sure that that didn't happen, and luckily it did not. But again, you see sort of this erasure of our history, and the understanding the significance of how this impacted the community significantly. The other picture here is of Sher Singh, who was wrongly arrested in days after 9/11. He was arrested on the Amtrak for wearing a turban. Police yelled, "House Osama bin Laden." The crowd screamed, "Kill him and burn in hell," as he was handcuffed and arrested. So he was arrested because of a tip, the see something, say something. In the days after 9/11, people, again, didn't know. They called in this tip, and he was dragged off the train, almost like a mob scene. The news media played the video of his arrest as connected to 9/11 weeks after this, even though the day of he was released on no charges because he had nothing to do with 9/11. So again, you see a lot of the media imagery, and I skipped over a couple slides back just because I was trying to save some time, but a lot of times the media doesn't, with that limited portrayal, when you do have portrayals that are negative and incorrect, it has that much more impact. And unfortunately, because of the lack of awareness, it's significantly impacted the community overall. One of the things I just wanted to mention about Balbir Singh Sodhi, because I'm talking a lot about the negative. 5 minutes, okay. So Balbir Singh Sodhi, there was actually a video by Valerie Kaur, who went to visit Balbir Singh Sodhi's wife, who now resides in India. And one of the things she remembers about the death, besides obviously it being a tragic incident in her life, was the community support that she received subsequent to that. And here you can see a letter that was provided by the community to the Sodhi family. So there are bright spots, and again, there is a memorial to Balbir Singh Sodhi in Arizona to recognize what he and many others in the Sikh community went through. So SALDF actually did a study in 2012 in conjunction with Stanford University about people's understanding of the turban. And some of the findings of the study may not surprise you. 70% could not identify a Sikh in a picture as a Sikh, and associated the turban with Osama bin Laden. 48% associated the turban and beard with Islam. So we talked about that earlier. I know Seher mentioned that there was this, people oftentimes were incorrectly targeted Sikhs, thinking they were Muslim. And yes, I know civil rights groups have been very clear on the message that we're not going to shift the blame anywhere else. And especially in Sikhis, standing up for injustice of any community is important. So the Sikh community overall has shared that message that hate doesn't have home anywhere and shouldn't have home anywhere in this country. And again, anti-turban bias among those even with knowledge of Sikhism. So even in some cases where folks knew who Sikhs were, there was still an anti-turban bias. And I have a great anecdote about a study that was conducted, which I'm not going to share in the interest of time. So if anyone wants to chat with me after, I'll be happy to share some of that. Okay. I'm just going to skip. So post 9/11, what are we seeing? In 2012, a significant incident happened in the Sikh community. We had seen over the years attacks on community members, but I think this was, and even vandalism of property, in some cases at houses of worship. But this is the first time we saw murders in houses of worship. And I actually recently visited Oak Creek and got a chance to speak with the survivors, and it was pretty humbling. On August 12th, 2012, a white supremacist fatally shot 6 worshipers and wounded 3 others, including the first officer to respond to the scene. Wade Michael Page had cased out the building prior to actually committing this act. And he actually had called ahead to find out what time services were. In fact, I guess they gave him the timing, but they gave the timing, not he came earlier, which was lucky in the sense there was less Sangat there. But he was able to kill 6 people before he was shot on sight. And it was the first time that I think the community realized that, or it became even clearer maybe, that the ability to freely and peacefully worship was not guaranteed. And also the importance of putting security measures in place at our houses of worship, and it's fortunately something that we have to do. And again, I'm happy to share some of the conversations I had with community members at Oak Creek, but they were really, really enlightening. And we see continued issues even till today. A couple months back in Modesto, California, a Gurdwara was vandalized, and a Grunthi, who's the equivalent of our priest, was assaulted at the Gurdwara. He was told to go back to his country. So unfortunately, we see a lot more of this, and this is heightened with the negative political discourse that we're seeing now. So unfortunately, SALDEF does respond to a number of incidents across the country, and we have seen an uptick in the last couple of years. And I'm just kind of winding down the presentation, so hopefully I'm still in the timing. So throughout it all, the community continues to move forward and contribute to the broader American society, despite all of these things that have happened. And I have a couple examples here. We have Gurbir Grewal, who hopefully everybody is familiar with. He's the Attorney General here in New Jersey. He's the 61st Attorney General. And he was confirmed on January 16th, 2018. It's a big accomplishment for the community, but even for Gurbir Grewal, it's not been without challenge. You guys may be familiar with the issue that he had with New Jersey 101.5, where 2 disc jockeys, Dennis Malloy and Judy Franco, kind of were very dismissive of him and wearing the turban and said some discriminatory things about him on air. And also in September 2018, the Bergen County Sheriff Michael Cedino resigned under public pressure after secretly recorded comments were released regarding disparaging comments about Gurbir Grewal wearing a turban, alongside derogatory remarks about other people. Why is this so shocking? I mean, it's shocking on a couple different levels, and on some levels, as I go through the history, it's not shocking. But it's interesting because all law enforcement reports to the Attorney General. So you're basically saying something against your boss, which in any work situation is not good. But obviously there's a lot of factors that go into this. So it's really, it's disheartening, but we continue to move forward. The next picture is of Ravi Balla, who's the mayor of Hoboken. He's the first Sikh mayor. And he also had issues. Him and his wife Navneet, during his campaign, had death threats and were also the subject of racist flyers. Oh, I'm sorry. Just like 2 more minutes. I just wanted to share this really quick. Mayor Preet Ditbal, mayor of Yuba City, first Sikh American woman. She was mayor from 2017 to 2018 of Yuba City, California. And I just want to share this and highlight this because a lot of those issues I talked about earlier in my presentation happened in California. And now you have a Sikh American woman mayor of California, of a successful district where they have an extremely successful farming community. In fact, 95% of all peach farming out of California is done by Sikh American farmers. So I'll just leave you with that. And I'm coming to the end now. I just want to very briefly share the story of Kamal Kulsi. So in 1981, the Pentagon imposed a dress code bearing banning long hair and beards, saying they interfered with the wearing of the military helmet and the gas mask. Lieutenant Kamal Kulsi joined the army in 2009, I believe. Sorry, in 2001, but was asked to go active duty in 2009. And when he joined the army, they said that he would be able to get a uniform accommodation for his turban and beard. But when they asked him to go to active duty in 2009, they told him that that was not the case. So Lieutenant Colonel Kamal Kulsi fought for that right to be able to get the religious accommodation, and he felt that the not allowing that would violate the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. And to keep this short, he did get the religious accommodation, and it paved the way for many other Sikh Americans to join the army and other branches of the military. And I want to just conclude with the story of Deputy Dhaliwal. Some of you may have heard of him in the news recently. He is a law enforcement officer out of Harris County. He had always wanted to be a police officer because both his father and uncle served in the Indian Navy and military. And he really wanted to represent the Sikhs in law enforcement. Saldef actually worked with him and his family for him to get the uniform accommodation at Harris County. Unfortunately, he was gunned down in the line of duty at a traffic stop on September 27, 2019. And across the Sikh American community and within the state of Texas, he was recognized as a hero and a trailblazer. The Harris County Police Department actually, in his honor, now made that uniform accommodation policy permanent as of October 11th. And the Harris County Sheriff said of Dhaliwal, "He saw in our profession the opportunity to serve with a deeper purpose and to make a positive difference and succeed far beyond his own dreams and expectations." And I would just leave you with, I believe that's the goal of the Sikh American community as we've seen the journey over the last century. So I thank you so much for your time. There's so much more I wanted to cover but couldn't, so hopefully I'll have the opportunity to do so, and just thank you so much for having me here today.